Right, welcome to Purrfect English, and today our grammar cats are going to be teaching us about sentences. So grab your cup of tea or coffee and a furry friend as we investigate this very important section of English grammar. Now, why do we study sentences? Well, the more we learn about the different types of sentences, we can see how we can put them together in a far more sophisticated way to bring across an idea or an argument. So, let's get started. Right, today we're going to look at 3 different sentence types, namely simple, compound, and complex sentences. There are a number of ways that we can choose to talk about sentences. This is the way that we're going to be focusing in on in this video. What is a sentence? Well, a sentence expresses a complete thought. And in order to understand whether or not a complete thought has been expressed, we look for what we call clauses. Now, a clause is a group of words containing a finite verb. We spent a lot of time looking at finite verbs in the verb video, so if you're confused about this section, that's a good place to start. But if you know what's happening, then let's just get going. So we're looking for a group of words that contain that finite verb, and so what is the test for finite verbs? Well, of course, if you remember from before, we make use of SNOT. In other words, we look for a subject to which that verb refers. We look for the verb if it contains number. Can it tell us singular or plural? We look at whether or not that subject and verb can live on its own. And finally, we look for tense. Now, how do we determine the subject of a sentence? Well, it's pretty easy. To look for the subject of the sentence, we're determining who or what has actually performed the action. So, we ask who or what before the verb. So in the sentence, the cat sleeps all day. The verb is, of course, sleeps. So what sleeps all day? Well, pretty easy to answer. The cat. So the cat is the subject of my sentence. It answers the question of what sleeps. Now when we look at this example, Twiggy gobbled her kibbles this morning, we're going to decide whether or not we have a clause. So remember, we're looking for the finite verb, and the verb in the sentence here, which is the action verb, action word, has to be gobbled. Is gobbled finite? Well, yes, of course it is. We have a subject to which it refers. Who is gobbling? It is Twiggy. It is singular. There's only one Twiggy. It's in the past tense, and this is a simple past because we have just the ed form. And so, yes, this is a complete thought. It makes sense on its own. And so we do, in fact, have a group of words with a finite verb. So we have a clause. It gets Twiggy's claw of approval. But we also get phrases. These are a group of words without a finite verb. They do exist within sentences, but they cannot be a full sentence on their own. You always need a finite verb for it to be a full sentence. So what do these look like? Sauntering into the kitchen. Well, if you don't know what the word saunter means, it means to walk slowly in a relaxed manner, stroll, amble, wander, the perfect way to describe a cat's movement. So let's look at the action word in this situation, and it's of course the word sauntering. And we've got to ask whether or not it is finite. Well, straight away, when I'm applying SNOT, I know that it's not finite because I do not have a subject. I don't know who is sauntering here. And once I get to S, I don't even need to go all the way down the knot. Sauntering, no idea who's doing it. It is a phrase. But just for the sake of the example, we don't know how many are sauntering, nor do we know when it's happening, because I don't have that auxiliary verb, was, is, or will be to help me get tense. If you need more about this, please watch the tense video. So here we have, of course, a group of words without a finite verb. It is just a phrase. I might have a verb, but I do not have a finite verb. So for a sentence, we are looking for a group of words that at least has one main clause. So what is a main clause? Well, a main clause is also known as an independent clause. And to be independent means that you can do things on your own. That's what it means. Hey, you don't need any help. So, in the case of clauses, we're looking for a clause that can stand on its own and that expresses a complete thought, independent of everything else in the sentence. If we're looking at the subordinate clause, we're looking for a clause that is actually dependent. Now don't get confused here. It is still a clause. It still has a finite verb, but in this case, this clause within the sentence is actually dependent on another clause. So this clause generally begins with a subordinating conjunction. Don't worry if you don't understand this all now. It will make sense as the video goes on, but for now, just understand that there are two types that we're looking at: main clauses and subordinate clauses. So, I said we were going to look at sentences, and we're going to be looking at three different types: the simple, the compound, and the complex, and we're going to do those in turn. Starting with a simple sentence has one main clause. So we're looking for one finite verb in the sentence. The example, Twiggy sauntered into the kitchen. Let's look for the verb, and it's been put in red for you. It is, of course, sauntered, isn't it? And if we test it against that, it fulfills it for us. It is our finite verb because I know who sauntered. It's Twiggy. I know that it's singular, and I know that it's in the past tense. And of course, it is a complete thought. Now, in that sentence, can you find any other verbs? Well, there aren't any. And so because I have no other verbs to test to see whether or not it's finite, I can see that this, in fact, is merely one clause. It is a simple sentence, therefore. I only have one clause, simple sentence. Now let's move on. With a compound sentence, we're looking at having two or more main clauses. And these are generally joined together by a coordinating conjunction, or writers may use a semicolon. Today we're going to look at coordinating conjunctions. These are the conjunctions that fit into the fanboys family. Now fanboys is just a way for you to remember them. These are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And I would encourage you to just commit them to memory. It's very, very helpful to do that. So let's look at an example. So remember, we're going to be using our test. We're going to first be looking for the number of finite verbs before we look for the conjunctions. So in this example, Twiggy wants her favorite biscuit treats, but they are all finished. That would just be awful, wouldn't it? Well, let's see if we can find some verbs. Firstly, we've got the verb once. Does it fulfill snot? Twiggy once, yes. Okay, so I've got a subject and I've got my finite verb. I know that it's singular and I know that it's in the present tense. Perfect, I've got clause number one. Let's look for clause number two. This one's a little bit more tricky. We're looking at the verb, the finite verb, are. I know it's finite because I've got a subject, they. Are is actually the verb. It tells me that it's plural and it gives me the tense, present tense. If you need more information about why are is actually considered a verb, watch the verbs video. But here, as you can see, we've actually got two clauses. And is it joined by any word? Well, of course, it is going to be joined by the word but. And that is one of my fanboys. It's the B in fanboys, and so it is a coordinating conjunction. I have two clauses joined by this coordinating conjunction of but, and so I have a compound sentence. Now let's see if we can do complex sentences. For a complex sentence, we have a main clause plus we have a subordinate clause, and that subordinate clause is generally joined by a subordinating conjunction. What is a subordinating conjunction, you ask? Well, it's all the other conjunctions that we make use of that don't fit into the fanboys family. So, words that we use every day, like although, because, before, even though, as soon as, all of these fall under the subordinating conjunction family. There are many subordinating conjunctions, so the best way to remember them is to actually learn the fanboys really, really well, and then you'll know that the other ones fall into the subordinating family. Let's look at this example. Twiggy sleeps all day because she hunts all night. Now, once again, we're going to be looking for our finite verbs. What's the first one that you can see there? Of course, it's sleep, so let's test it. Is there a subject? Yes, Twiggy sleeps. Do I know number? Is it singular or plural? Yes, I know that it is, in fact, singular. Do I know tense? Yes, it's simple present, isn't it? She sleeps. And so therefore, can it live on its own? Yes, it can. It's a complete thought. Twiggy sleeps all day. Perfect. So now let's see if we can find a second clause, and we're looking for another verb that we can test whether or not it's finite. My second verb is, in fact, hunts. Does it have a subject? Of course it does. Twiggy, right? So she hunts. The subject of that sentence is the pronoun she. Do I know how many? Yes, it is, of course, singular. Do I know tense? Yes, present tense. And so, once again, this can live on its own, complete thought. So now I do have two clauses, but how are they joined together? Can you find the conjunction? It is, of course, because. And we know that this is subordinating conjunction. Like I said, it isn't one of the fanboys. The B stands for but, not because. So it's not one of the fanboys. I know it's subordinating. I have two clauses and joined by the subordinating conjunction, so it is complex. All right, remember that I said that a complex sentence is made up of a main clause and a subordinate clause. Now, how do you go about determining which one is the main and which one is the subordinate? To remind you, the main clause is also known as the independent clause. In other words, it's a clause that can live on its own. And so we're going to look at what that looks like within a sentence. The subordinate clause is the dependent clause. In other words, it is still a clause, it has a finite verb, but this clause actually needs the help of the main clause in order for it to make sense. So generally, we're looking for clauses that begin with a subordinating conjunction. So in the example, Twiggy sleeps all day because she hunts all night, we're going to determine which part of that sentence is main and which is subordinate. Now, what's important to note that in these kinds of sentences, we're talking about complex sentences now, you can either begin with the main or end with the main clause. So it's not enough to kind of learn where you think it will be in the sentence. You really have to look at each sentence in order to determine which part is main, which part is subordinate. So let's look at this example. Can we actually swap these sentences around so I can show you how it works? Put because at the beginning of the sentence. So you could say, because Twiggy hunts all night, she sleeps all day. Both of those examples make sense, don't they? So now let's have a look at whether we can find the main clause in each one of those examples. So when we're looking at the first one, which is the part of the sentence that really can live on its own? Well, I can say Twiggy sleeps all day, full stop, can't I? Twiggy sleeps all day. It's a statement. Could I say, because she hunts all night, full stop? I can't really say that second part on its own, can I? While it is still a clause, I've got a finite verb, hunts, she hunts. It actually, because of the word because, it actually shows me that it depends upon the first part of the sentence, which is Twiggy sleeps all day. When I swap that sentence around, she sleeps all day still remains the main clause. And because Twiggy hunts all night is a subordinate, I've just chosen to either start or end with it. So I can begin like it is in orange with the main clause, or I can end with it, or I can end with the subordinate or begin with the subordinate. Where I choose to begin with the subordinate, it's important that I make use of the punctuation mark of the comma after the subordinate clause, like I've done in the second example. as it helps your reader to understand where the subordinate ends and where the main clause begins. This really helps them to follow your logic and follow your reasoning a little bit better. Okay, so please make use of that comma so that people don't have to reread your sentences. So today we looked at different kinds of sentences. We looked at them either being simple, compound, or complex. Now there is much more that we can say about sentences. This is just the starting point, and there'll be more videos to follow. But when we understand these, it really is the start of writing great sentences and great paragraphs. When analyzing a sentence, we use the following tests to determine if it's simple, compound, or complex. Firstly, we need to ask ourselves if we're in fact dealing with a clause. Remember, we cannot have a sentence if we've merely got a phrase. So when we look at it, see if you've got a finite verb, and if you do have a finite verb, you are dealing with clauses. Then we want to look at the number of clauses that we've got. So if we've got at least a clause, we can start looking at number. Where I've got one clause, then I'm dealing with a simple sentence. Remember that a simple sentence has to do with how many clauses I have, not how many phrases I have. So if I have a clause, I could have a number of phrases added to that clause. It would still be a simple sentence. I could have a very long and complicated simple sentence. The test is, how many clauses do I have? If it's one, it's simple. It's got nothing to do with the length of the sentence. It's a very important one to remember. If I do have more than one clause, well, then it's in the realm of complex or compound sentences. So I need to determine whether I've got main clauses, or do I have a main clause and a subordinate clause. To see this, I'm going to determine whether or not what conjunction am I making use of. So if I am making use of a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, please commit those to memory. Or then I am dealing with a compound sentence. Of course, the writer could also have made use of a semicolon, and we'll look at that when we look at punctuation in another video. Secondly, if it's not a fanboys, then it is most probably a subordinating conjunction, and that means it is a complex sentence. Words like because, if, since all fall under that. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that introduction to sentences. There's so much more to learn, and the more we learn about sentences and combining them in different ways, the more that we're able to really express ourselves well and in interesting ways. We are able to develop far more complex sentences and interesting paragraphs. So keep tuning in, keep learning. Remember that learning is a journey, not a destination. Goodbye for now.